Good afternoon, Triple M rocks football at Rock Thursday night football. Richmond getting up over Carlton. 6 wins now in the best part of 7 games. The Tigers back in the 8 at the expense of Collingwood. I'll discuss a huge fallout from that game last night in the second segment of this podcast. There's some big discussion points, including from Michael Voss regarding the goal review and Damien Hardwick regarding Bolton's celebration, or taunt, if you like, with the ball. It was like an old-fashioned sort of backyard-style football move. Anyway, off the top this morning, wanted to discuss just briefly the fact that in the background, the clubs are now certainly of the opinion that the AFL's very advanced, or particularly advanced, on its broadcast deal that should yield a record broadcast deal. Now, I won't go into a lot of details today. I think they'll all play out over the next few weeks. But I think Gil McLachlan is reasonably close now to locking away a deal, which I think will see the existing broadcasters probably keep a bulk of the game. Now, that's more an educated opinion rather than fact at this stage, but that is edging closer, that deal, and I'll have more on that next week. Mentioned Thursday night football. It was an absolute belter in pouring rain last night at the MCG. A good old-fashioned clash that saw Richmond, in the end, win by 15 points. They got off to a good start. Carlton did too little, too late, and conceded more than 70 inside 50s. You're not going to win many games conceding 70-plus inside 50s, as Michael Voss pointed out post-game. But some big fallout. As I mentioned, it was the really expensive Collingwood for the moment inside the 8, puts Richmond back in the 8. A goal review was particularly costly for the Blues. It was Newnes' goal. It would have put them to within 3 points. They had the bulk of the momentum off the back of Mackay kicking 3 goals at that point in the last quarter. The goal umpire, was overruled by the goal review, and these were Michael Voss's thoughts on the issue post-game. He thinks it should be more clear-cut to overturn that type of decision.
Yeah, I'll make up your own mind. I think it's got to be definitive, doesn't it? Like, if we're going to make decisions like that in games, you'd hope it's definitive. So I guess I've now got the luxury of being able to sit back and see it, make my own judgments with it slowed down a little bit. But certainly we'd want to make sure we're absolutely 100% sure before overturning something like that myself. But clearly the call was made, and we've got to end up living with the result.
So Michael Voss thinks the vision should be more definitive. Look, I thought the vision was reasonably definitive, and this is the reason that we have the goal review in place, to get the best results in these types of circumstances and the right outcomes. Having said that, that's Michael Voss's view. It will be obviously a focal point going forward. It is hard sometimes with that grainy close-up vision detecting the fingers going backwards, but I thought last night you could see the fingers going backwards, and I thought it was reasonably clear-cut. But that was one of the, not controversies, but big discussion points. Controversial if you're a Blues fan, but discussion points last night. The other one, of course, was Shai Bolton's celebrations. Now, just to emphasise, I love watching Bolton play football. I think he's one of the most athletic players in the game, to be quite frank. But he showed the ball to Doherty on the way into an open goal. This was Hardwick's view on that post-game.
He's made a mistake. It's not us. It's not what we're about. And he'll be regretful, no question. He'll be accountable and responsible for it. It's certainly not part of who he is and part of what we are. So we're disappointed, but we'll work our way through it and support him, and he'll learn some lessons from it. It's not a great look. It's not what we stand for. So.
Damien Hardwick, there was some context. Bolton and Doherty had exchanged words at three-quarter time. They exchanged words post-game as well. So I think there's no ill feeling on an ongoing basis between those two players. I think it was all sort of sorted out, but they had exchanged some words at three-quarter time before Bolton showed the ball to him as he ran into the open goal. It's interesting. Damien Hardwick was obviously a bit critical there of Bolton last night. Doesn't want it in his team's repertoire or game plan. Ben Rutten was sort of criticising him some circles for singling out Jake Stringer post-game last week, and one of the criticisms I heard was, you wouldn't hear Damien Hardwick do that. But obviously Damien Hardwick feels strongly about that action or motion last night on the part of Bolton and doesn't want it as part of his team going forward. Just in terms of the injury latest, this is interesting for Carlton fans in particular. Bolton for Richmond fans, he's got a hamstring concern. But Durden, there were some significant knee concerns last night. I'm told at this stage from Blue sources that he'll likely miss a few games. That sounds maybe at the optimistic end and the good news end compared to what that might have been given it was a knee concern. They've got 6 key defenders at least on their list, the Blues, and they've now only got 1 fit key defender, which is a terrible blow for them. Martin, calf tightness. That's not too bad. He'll be assessed for next week. And Sard, he got a knock in the eye, but he was fine in the end. He played out the game. Bailey Smith, his illicit drug use and admission, frank admission, quick admission, one of the biggest off-field stories, I guess, so far this year. The AFL officially concluded its investigation yesterday, finding he'll cop 2 weeks as a penalty and no fine. Now, that 2 weeks is served after his 2 weeks for headbutting, which means he won't be back for the best part of 4 weeks in total. The reason for the no fine, in part, was his, frank immediate admission. So that probably has cost him, or saved him, I should say, up to $25,000. Smith was back at the kennel today, back training, and no doubt the Bulldogs will want him fit and firing coming into what's going to be an important final 5 rounds, where I imagine they'll be on the edge or vying certainly for finals contention. But Bailey Smith back training at the Bulldogs today, no fine, a 2-week sanction for his illicit cocaine use. And I'll whip through some other ones just to finish off with today. An interesting one yesterday. Brad Scott went to Adelaide to visit the SANFL, that's the SANFL clubs, and also the 2 Adelaide clubs. He was doorstopped at the airport and gave a sort of a brief doorstop interview and revealed that he is looking at the SANFL model of last possession out of bounds, where you take the free kick, last touch out of bounds. That's always been a controversial idea. I guess the AFL's always been looking at it. I don't think they're looking at it particularly seriously. Having said that, that'll divide opinion. It's a pretty controversial rule change. There's existing issues at the moment around the interpretation of deliberate out of bounds, so perhaps it would resolve that issue. But Brad Scott confirming yesterday that he was looking at that. This is what he said briefly at the airport.
It seems fairly universal that it's been a positive change, so it's fair to say the AFL are looking very closely at what the SANFL are doing with last disposal.
Pretty clear from Brad Scott yesterday when he landed in Adelaide, explaining they're looking at that last touch rule at the moment, the AFL. That would be a big radical one, so I guess opinion will be split in that regard. Thursday night football, Gil McLachlan flagged yesterday. He was speaking Gil yesterday at a St Kilda Danny Frawley function to raise money, obviously, for the Danny Frawley Centre. Gil flagged that the AFL in an ideal world would have 14 to 15 Thursday night games. He thinks that's about the right number, which is a few more than we've got at this present moment. There were 51,000 fans there last night, which I thought in driving rain was a pretty positive crowd. So that's what the AFL is looking at in that regard. Gil was pretty funny yesterday. He spoke about the dissent and arms out, and he sort of joked that he changed the dissent rule and the interpretation around that. There's been all sorts of Herald Sun articles recently regarding the AFL changing its official stance on that to the umpires, but Gil joked yesterday that he changed his stance on that after Mitch Robinson and after his son Sydney does it at local footy and keeps giving away 50-metre or free kicks. So that's what forced Gil's change. He thought he better alter that. That was a joke, but I thought it was an interesting thing to come up in his speech yesterday. Gil also flagging that the digital ticketing, which is causing a lot of, concern amongst fans, is one of the key reasons in the AFL's view, amongst others, why the crowds are a little bit off this year, and they're going to revert to paper as well as digital ticketing next year going forward. So Gil speaking yesterday. Just briefly on the Giants coaching search, I've mentioned it on this podcast. Don Pike is a name that's come up in a couple of my conversations this week. I think the Giants are early in that process. They're forming a shortlist that I think will include Uze, Kingsley, the incumbent, which is McVeigh, and of course Clarkson. So that's their initial list, but Don Pike's name has been popular in a couple of discussions that have come up on my radar this week. He's obviously a senior assistant at Sydney, lives in the eastern suburbs. I think he's originally from Canberra, which is one of the Giants' key zones as well. So this makes a lot of sense, but we'll have to keep a close eye on that one. Obviously, in coming months, there's no rush there from the Giants' perspective, because McVeigh is doing a good job at the minute. On Tasmania, a lot of discussion this week. I won't go into it ad nauseum today, but one club I believe is potentially increasingly supportive, based on my discussions, is Carlton. That's not their official position, but I get the impression that Brian Cook, their CEO, thinks it's a reasonable deal. So they might be one of the clubs that are supportive of a standalone side. I should add that only really at the moment Richmond, Carlton, and Geelong and Adelaide are the clubs that have sort of come out publicly and supported it. The AFL want an overwhelming majority. They need at least 66% of the clubs, which is 12 clubs, probably 13 technically, and there's not a lot of clubs at the moment supporting it. They're waiting on the information and presentation which they're expecting in August, but the key prerequisite, according to a lot of clubs I speak to, is a stadium, and there's a lot of work to be done on that in that regard. And obviously, in terms of the games this weekend, it all kicks off tonight. The Saints and Essendon. Parrish is injured. Massimo D'Ambrosio, that's a great name. Massimo is expected to make his debut. He's been named to make his debut for the Bombers. McGrath back for the Bombers. An important game again for the Saints, particularly in this, what looks like a real now tight tussle for the 8 with Collingwood involved. Port Adelaide and the Swans at the Adelaide Oval tomorrow. That's a good game, one of the games of the round. West Coast and Geelong should be a little stocking filler as far as Geelong's concerned, given West Coast's form, that game over in Perth. Probably the game of the round in some respects is the Giants and the Bulldogs tomorrow night. No Bailey Smith, obviously. Jamari Ugle-Hagan gets a chance with Karmas omitted. So, Buku Karmas, I should say, omitted. So that's going to be an absolute beauty tomorrow night. The Gold Coast and Adelaide on Sunday. I'll be on the boundary tonight in a Triple M first. I've brought in Jill, our producer, can attest. I've brought in my wet weather gear. So I always bring in the old cashmere and wool jacket. Gets wet and I look like a wet rag post-game when I do some stuff with roaming Browne. So I'll be dry tonight. Hopefully it'll be freezing on the boundary. But I'm looking forward to that. And obviously our podcast again on Monday. Triple M rocks football. Stay tuned for all the football action. It should be a good weekend on Triple M Football.
Shut up!